Hello and welcome to another exciting video. In this one, we'll learn about using React error boundaries to handle errors in React components. No matter how hard you try, eventually your app code just isn't going to behave the way you expect it to, and you will need to handle those exceptions. If a render is thrown and unhandled, your application will be removed from the page, leaving the user with a blank screen. Kind of awkward. Luckily for us, there's a simple way to handle errors in your application using a special kind of component called an error boundary. Unfortunately, there is currently no way to create an error boundary component with a function, and you have to use a class component instead. But we got another lucky break because there's a terrific open source library we can use called React Error Boundary. In this lesson, we will learn how to write our own simple error boundary and then how to use React Error Boundary instead. We'll also learn the implications of where we place our error boundaries in our React component tree. Now, as hard as you work on your application, sometimes unexpected things will happen. I don't expect people will be throwing errors in the body of your function, but they could be calling functions that don't exist. For example, over here, if I type foo within this function, this does not exist, and obviously it's going to throw an error. Let's take a look at how you can manage these with React. Here we have some explode state where we initialize that to false. Then we have a button. On click of that button, we are setting the setExplode to true. Now, when the explode is set to true, we are evaluating the condition over here. And in case explode is true, we are rendering this bomb function. Otherwise, we are saying push the button. Now, the bomb function over here, you can see, throws this error. Boom. So if we go now over here, and as you can see, the button is there. It says push the button because the explode is set to false. When the page renders, if I go ahead and click on this, I don't see any error. The page is all blank now, but in the console log, you can see over here that we are getting the error over here. Now, if you closely observe this over here, it is giving you the stack trace of the React component. So initially over here, it says in app. So this is where we are rendering our app. And then just above it, it says in div created by app. So this is the div that it is talking about. And within that, it says in div created by app again. So it's talking about this div. And within that div, we have this bomb created by app. So this is the function or component that it is pointing at, that the error has occurred over here. And here you can see the error message is also appearing. Over here you can see that it is also suggesting consider adding an error boundary to your tree to customize your error handling behavior. And that is what we will be doing now. Error boundaries have to be class components. And to create a class component with React, we are going to say class error boundary extends React component, and within this we'll have a state, and we'll be initializing the state as error null, and then we'll have a static method over here, and we'll call that get derived state from, and we'll be passing the error as an input over here, and then this will be basically returning the error. We'll also have a render method over here in this error boundary class, and this render will be first of all checking the error. So if we have the error, and we will be getting it from the state, so if the error is there, we'll have a condition in place. It's called if error, and within this what we'll do is we'll be returning some error message over here. So we'll say error occurred, and we'll close this div. Otherwise, we'll be simply returning the props.children over here. So we'll have this in place. Now we have our error boundary created. Now let's see how we can use this error boundary. Now to make use of the error boundary over here in our component where we have this explode bomb, we will be simply making use of the error boundary, and within that we'll have the condition that we have right now. So we'll say error boundary, and we'll be closing it over here. And within this error boundary, we now have the explode condition defined. Let's save this and try clicking on the push button. So when we click on that button, the error definitely comes up. You can see over here. But now we are not getting a blank page that we were getting earlier. And still, we are getting this error message coming up. Boom. And here, the stack trace is also available. And as you can see over here, now we are getting this message which says React will try to recreate this component tree from scratch using the error boundary you provided. Now, instead of this error message that we are getting over here, we can also create a function component. And instead of this, we can call that component. Let's go ahead and see how we can do that. So let's say we have a function and we call that as error fallback. So here we'll have this function in place, and if you observe closely, it expects error as an input, and then over here we are returning something went wrong and the message over here, and then we are closing that component. So this error fallback that we have over here can now be used at this place whenever the error is taking place. So all we need to do is just write this dot props dot and then the fallback component that we want to have. And the fallback component is basically an attribute of error boundary, and we'll see how we are going to make use of it. And then here we'll be passing the error that we encountered. So here we have the error, and we will close this. Now the fallback component, as I mentioned, will be used over here in the error boundary as an attribute. So we can say fallback component, and we will be then copying this error fallback that we created. We'll pass it over here, and the rest of the stuff will remain as is. So now we have our error fallback, and instead of a simple text message, we now have a component which will be rendered. So let's go ahead and check it out now. Let's click on this button, and there we go. We have this something went wrong, and then boom is coming up, and the error, as you can see over here, now has this in error boundary, and from there it goes to bomb, and all the other error messages are exactly the same. So we have this error boundary. A couple of things that I would like to highlight over here is that this error boundary gets rendered where exactly it's placed. So it's going to replace all the other content within its region. So for example, if I just move this whole thing from this place all the way to top, like error boundary, and then we close this error boundary over here, you'll notice that if I refresh this page and click on this push the button, it's replacing all the other content that was there. So the button has gone now, and we are left with only the error message. Similarly, you can have more than one instance of error boundary for the same error, as we can have this over here as well, and we'll close it here. So now if I go ahead and click on this, you'll notice that the button remains and the error message is also appearing. So this time around, the nearest error boundary that is there where the error is occurring or where the error has occurred, that will basically kick in, and it will accordingly replace the content. The farthest one will not kick in. This could happen when this error boundary will kick in when we have some error in this place, and this is occurring when the error is happening over here. So that way you can have a hierarchy of error boundaries within your component, and accordingly display the error messages or handle the error messages. Now, as we mentioned earlier in the lecture, that we will be using a third-party error boundary library. So what we need to do now is let's get rid of all these lines of code that we have written, and this as well. And what we now need to do is have a third-party library script included, and we can do that by going to the npm package manager and from there grabbing the link for the same, and there we have it, React error boundary. So what we need to do now is, instead of having our custom definition of error boundary, all we need to do is just make use of React error boundary dot error boundary, and instead of class we'll call this as const. And that's the only change that we need to make. The fallback component and the declaration that we have in place over here need not to be changed. And now if I go ahead and click on this button, you get the same error coming up, but with just one line of code. Another important thing to note is that our error boundary can only handle certain errors, specifically errors that are happening within the React call stack. It won't handle errors that are happening in event handlers, or if there's an error in an asynchronous callback, like a promise handler. It will only handle errors that happen within a React call stack, like the render method or a React useEffect callback. To review, to handle React errors, you need to create an error boundary, or as I recommended, use React error boundary from npm. With this error boundary, you can wrap parts of your code. Any descendants of that error boundary will have its errors handled by the error boundary. With the error boundary from the React error boundary library, you can provide a fallback component. That fallback component will be rendered in the event of an error, allowing you to recover from the error or simply display an error message for the user to read.